Happy hell unleashing season, Yinzers and Yinzettes. I told you I was going to take a week vacation. As you hear this, I am recouping and re-energizing in the Appalachian Hills of southwestern Pennsylvania. But I didn't want to neglect all you loyal listeners. So here's a little bit of a What Yin's redo. I'm bringing to you the interview with John Harris, author of the Mike Tomlin biography, Tomlin. Um, you may not have heard it last year, or if you did, it's just a reminder why 18 seasons without a losing campaign is super significant. And just getting into a little bit more of Tomlin's origin. And then after that, I'm bringing you once again the interview with author Roy Blount Jr., who wrote the book. He was embedded with the 1973 Steelers team and wrote the book about three bricks shy of a load before the dynasty happened. Just an iconic author of the vein of, say, a Hunter Thompson, and I just think that that deserves another listen if you missed it from back in the off season. So enjoy these highlights from what Jin's talking about, and we'll be back next week with an all new show.
All right, welcome back. I've been talking about this new book on Mike Tomlin for a couple of weeks now. The ideal Christmas gift for Steeler fans this year. It's called Tomlin, the Soul of a Football Coach. And joining me now is the author of the book, former Tribune Review reporter John Harris. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Now, you say you once had preconceived ideas of who Mike Tomlin is, but you now have a greater understanding of who he really is because of this book. Was there a single light bulb moment that helped spark this new understanding for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just kind of looked at him like most reporters did. The reporters on one side, coaches on the other side. You say never the twain shall meet, and you kind of come up with generalities. Coaches talking cliches, so you think you kind of see where he's coming from or where he's not coming from. And I looked at it more initially from a selfish standpoint. I wanted him to talk more. I wanted him to reveal more, but he didn't, and he still doesn't. I mean, that's his thing. He keeps to himself. He's very private. Unfortunately, he didn't interview for the book, and I think that's another Tomlinism. I think that's who he is. If he can't, control the narrative in that regard, and not maybe 100% certain of everything that was going to be in the book, I think he was more comfortable. His brother, I'm very, appreciative. His brother talked a lot. And I feel like a lot of people I interviewed told me that, Coach T gave me his blessing. So I figure, with a lot of these biographies, people don't want it, don't want the biography written, or they don't want family or friends to talk to the writers. So the fact that he did so many people talk to me and mentioned it, I just believe that he wanted it, or he encouraged it. He just didn't want to have his fingerprints on it, so to speak. So that's something I learned about him, just the privacy, the total focus on football. That's what he is. His brother, Ed, I was talking to, because so many people say, oh, if he stopped coaching, he could be a great TV guy. And his brother just kind of chuckled, and he said, my brother is a gym teacher. He loves football. And I think sometimes, the book maybe helps not humanize him more, but just kind of look at him beyond the football coach, maybe a little bit what makes him tick, all the mentors he's had through the years, the people that he leaned on for advice as a very young coach. Should I take this job? Should I not take this job? Should I stay? I mean, I know he had a dilemma. It was one interesting thing in his bio. I kept seeing the Tennessee Martin. And I was like, Tennessee Martin, where'd that come from?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I looked, didn't see anything. And then I finally tracked down the coach at Arkansas State, who he was a Tennessee Martin. And when the Arkansas State, Randy Fitzer, who Steelers fans remember was a coach for a long time with the Steelers, they were on a recruiting trip in Memphis. And Joe Hollis was the Arkansas State coach. And they walked into I think it was Memphis East High School. And they said this guy was sitting here in a Tennessee Martin warm-up. And it was Tomlin. And he had just taken the job. And they were there all day recruiting, and they just started talking and kept talking. And all of a sudden, Fitzer and the Joe Hollis said, "Wait, we still got an opening. What about this guy?" And Tomlin was torn because he had just taken the job. He had gone with an assistant from the University of Memphis where he had done his graduate assistantship, and he was like, "Hey, this doesn't look good. Should I do this?" And one of his mentors kind of said, the one thing you want to do in this profession, it was the difference between going to a bigger program or a bigger FCS, FBS. And, the quicker you can get to that higher level, the better. And I think ultimately that kind of swayed him there. So you kind of get to look at him as a guy who, at a young age, just was kind of trying to find his way. And that had some self-doubt. Got a lot of encouragement from older coaches, people that hired him that saw something in him that maybe at that time he didn't see. And so I learned a lot about him that way. Attention to detail, the impact he had on individual players, getting better as players, his ability to not only connect and communicate, but teach, focusing on fundamentals and little drills that make you better, that may not be exciting or exotic, but if you keep doing them long enough, it'll make you a better player. Ronde Barber, Hall of Famer at Tampa Bay, talked a lot about that, how Tomlin just pretty much gave the defensive backs some drills that they scoffed at first, but within a month's time, they said that we saw that was making us better players. So I think the one thing I probably took from him is the persona. He's a player's coach. People see that side of him. Maybe people don't see the other side, the chalkboard side, the strategist side that he's about. But he's just not a guy to, he doesn't have the thing in front of his mouth, the clipboard on the sideline. He was, maybe to his detriment at times, not tooting his own horn more as far as some of the impact, some of the things he's done through the years as a coach, strategies and what have you. I always thought that the Super Bowl win against Arizona, they talked about the week before during practice, players were making interceptions and they weren't really kind of following, or they weren't blocking. And he did some cut-ups and he showed the guys, hey, this game could come down to a play like this. So when we get a turnover, we get a fumble recovery, we get an interception, I want everybody, all you guys on defense, to block.
Yeah.
Block. And as everybody remembers, you watch that highlight to this day, the blocking in that play was amazing, all the way down the field. And in fact, in the book, one of the Cardinals defensive backs talks about how they were just wiping this out on the blocks. And in fact, I had a book event this weekend. I was with Levi Brown, who played with the Steelers for a year, but he was on that Arizona team. And he was talking about how Larry Fitzgerald had bumped into one of his teammates on the sideline. And maybe that had prevented him from tackling James Harrison. And so that play, the players talked about after Brian McFadden talked about how, the coaching staff all week, they harped on it. And we did it. And then we saw the results of it. So little things like that, strategic things that he's done through the years, I think are things that maybe people don't notice about him.
All right. Now, when it comes to hiring Tomlin, you talked to one of the few people who had the mindset of Dan Rooney at the time, Cyrus Mary, one of the creators of the Rooney Rule. I'll tease that. You can pick that up in the book. But now when it comes to the Rooney Rule, Tomlin was not a Rooney Rule candidate. There was an unnamed candidate who is still in the league. Why is that a secret?
I don't know. I was talking to John Wooten, who's quoted in there, and I asked him. I said, "Who was it?" I prefer not to say. He's still in the league now. I've been racking my brain trying trying to figure out who that is, and never find it out. But that in itself was like a revelation to me because I'm like, Ron Rivera interviewed, and Ron Rivera, Hispanic candidate. So technically, Dan Rooney had satisfied the Steelers had satisfied the Rooney Rule requirement. They'd interviewed a candidate of color. Then they apparently interviewed someone else. So Mike Tomlin they didn't have to interview Mike Tomlin. I mean, to be honest, perfectly honest with you, in the relationship between John Wooten and Dan Rooney, that went all the way back to when John Wooten replaced Chuck Noll at guard with the Cleveland Browns. There's so many stories within stories here that are amazing. And he had a long-standing relationship with the Steelers. He knew Chuck Noll. John Wooten knew Chuck Noll, not as Chuck Noll that we know, but it's just a guy he knew. And so it was different. It was on a different relationship. And, that relationship carried over with Dan Rooney. So John Wooten felt comfortable enough to where he could ask, he said, "I'm just asking you as a favor, Mr. Rooney. Could you just talk to this young man?" And he did, and then brought him to Pittsburgh for the interview. So it's amazing how that all came about. So when you get more of the narrative and kind of put it all in perspective, it makes a little bit more sense as opposed to just, this thing that, okay, they hired this kid because, they wanted to satisfy, because the name was Rooney and they wanted to satisfy the Rooney Rule. And I'm not going to say that the Rooney Rule didn't have something to do with it. It did. The Rooney Rule did have something to do with Mike Tomlin getting the job, because if it wasn't for the John Wootens of the world, and if it wasn't for the Dan Rooneys of the world, he wouldn't have gotten that job.
John Wooten, a Cleveland Brown. How ironic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to meet with him this week. We have a book event in Fort Worth, and I'm going to have him tell that story a little bit, because I truly believe that his influence in the league and with that particular situation is a story that really, I don't think it's really been told that much. And it just puts the whole Mike Tomlin, story in perspective. And just they talked about the pressure of that Super Bowl that the Fitz-Pollard Alliance felt, because you had Mike Tomlin going up against Ken Wisenhunt and Russ Grimm.
Yeah.
And they're like, how the Steelers fans were looking at it. It was like, hey, what if Steelers had lost? And Mike Tomlin had lost to the coach that the Steelers had passed up. And he was like, wow, he said, so we were feeling a lot of pressure. He said, I don't know how many people are looking at it like that, but he said, that's how we were looking at it. I'm sure Mike Tomlin was feeling the pressure. And for the game to end the way it did, I mean, that was just unbelievable,
Oh yeah, best ever. Now, when Tomlin is hired, Sports Illustrated gets the scoop before the locals. Now, Pursuta has that Russ Grimm will get the job. I mean, was that a highly placed source? Do you know who his source was?
I mean, out of respect to Mike, I mean, I know who it is. He felt comfortable enough with it, as I write in the book. And I was kind of torn on that, because I know a lot of people probably at my former paper and in Pittsburgh are going to kind of frown on it. But I felt like we needed to tell the whole story, to also describe what it was a crazy time. That whole hiring process, it was not unlike any other. It was going back and forth. It was going over here. It was going over there. It was this rumor, that rumor. And I think, my concern was it was just a source. And it was no one was named, no quotes. And I just felt like a story of that magnitude that you kind of want to make sure you cover your backside.
Yeah.
And we didn't. And I remember, I mean, I can still remember that feeling of the looks that you would get from people with Steel, and even Mike Tomlin, who knows how he felt through the years. Those are the guys that wrote this story about me. Who are they? So it was, and I thought it was also a lesson in journalism. The rivalry between the Post Gazette and the Trib, I don't think it's as strong now. And I live in Texas now, but I don't think it's nearly as strong now as it was when I was there, because that was just cutthroat, tooth and nail, didn't want to get beat. And I think the Trib, because we were the smaller paper, as I tried to describe in the book, we felt that pressure, that need to try to write a story like that. Because if we write that story, we break that story, that elevates us. That gives us some, credibility and clout. And I tried to write it that way so people could understand, okay, why would they do that? And I think if you read that chapter, I think it explains why we did it. I just think and I think there was a way we could have done it and not been wrong, so to speak. But we went for the gusto, and we didn't get it.
Well, it didn't seem to affect Pursuita's relationship with the team because now he's with them.
Hey, I see. So it's. I'm glad. I mean, he's a great journalist. Mike, we covered many a game together, took many a road trip together. But here's the way I looked at it. His name was on it, but all our names were on it because he worked. You know what I'm saying? We worked at the Trib too.
Yeah.
So it impacted all of us. Myself, Scott Brown, who was the other beat writer at that time. So I took it personally because it affected me as a journalist, and just an interesting time. But that whole thing, yeah, and Mike Silver, who broke the story for Sports Illustrated, he was great. I talked to him, really good journalist, and he talked about even after he had written his story that Mike Tomlin was going to get the job, and then we came out, and he was starting to doubt it because he said, "Wait a minute, this guy's from Pittsburgh. What does he know that I don't know?" So up until the moment that the Steelers announced that Mike Tomlin, nobody really knew. It was just this great mystery and I hope I maybe uncovered some of it in the book, and that people at least give people a different perspective. Because I think there had been one narrative pretty much about how everything happened. I think my book maybe gets into that a little bit differently and shows another to it.
Yeah, it definitely fleshes that out. So many details behind the scenes that fans don't know about yet. Now, the biggest mystery for me into Tomlin's career is Bruce Arians' retirement. Because in Bruce's book, he says Tomlin promised to get him a contract. And after meeting with Rooney, the first phone call is just, sorry, Bruce, I couldn't get you the contract.
Yeah, it's funny because Randy Fichtner, who was also a coordinator, and I talked to Rip Shearer Jr., who actually, ironically, is Kevin Colbert's cousin.
Oh, okay.
And Rip Shearer Jr. was the coach at Memphis who hired Mike Tomlin. And really, if you want to look at it, was maybe one of the main guys to get him on the track because Tomlin was telling everybody he was going to go to law school. He had been at VMI, and he was the season didn't go that great, and he wasn't really sure. He wasn't really getting a lot of offers. And Rip Shearer Jr. was the head coach at Memphis, and they sat down and talked, and he just told him, to stick it out. But Rip Shearer also helped Randy Fichtner get coordinator's job a few years later at Memphis. And Rip said that when the Steelers let Randy go, he said, according to Rip, Randy was very surprised. And he said they had a short meeting with Mike, and he said, Mike said, I got to do this. And that was it.
Yeah.
Which kind of maybe dovetails into what you're saying with maybe, and as I've always wondered, I know Mike always says that. He always falls on a grenade and says it was mine. But sometimes, you have to wonder. No, it may have been some other influences as well. We don't know that for sure. But, why would you he seems to be a straightforward guy. Why would you tell somebody that if you knew that you weren't going to do that? To me, you just say, hey, we're not going to be able to bring you back. You know what I mean? Because seems to be how he is. So maybe he thought he was going to get it. Maybe he had a meeting and then he was told no. I guess we'll never know, right? Until Mike comes out with his definitive book, right? Then maybe we'll know.
Now, Tomlin gets a number of critiques that his contemporaries don't get. He won with Cowher's players, which you don't hear with Barry Switzer saying that he won with Jimmy Johnson's players, or the coaching tree, which seems to be a stickler for critics. Are these valid critiques, or are people just finding other reasons to find fault?
That's a good question. I guess if he was losing, you could rip him for that, right? and he
Yeah.
didn't lose. So, well, he didn't win with his own players. And I think Joey Porter had an interesting quote in there. He said we had some Steelers teams that I thought we were going to do it all with it all, and we didn't. He said, so I don't get this. He won with whatever, and the same team was 8-8 2 years before winning the Super Bowl, and you can attribute it to a lot of different factors, but obviously Tomlin did some tweaking, did some things that got that team back. Not only did they get to the one Super Bowl, they went to another one. They
Yeah.
lost it, but 2 years after that, they went to Super Bowl. So I think he was the coach of those teams, and just as he's now being, these are his players now, right? These are the players that Bill Cowher's nowhere around anymore. So the players that we see on this 2023 team are his players, right? So just as he's being critiqued and criticized for that, to follow your point, I think he should have been, hey, he did a good job. He came in, he was 34 years old. He came into the storied franchise with all these veterans, and he was able to turn them into a Super Bowl team. More power to him. Why it's been like that, I don't know. I know Steelers fans are spoiled. I used to write that when I was at the Trib. I mean, I don't think the Steelers have a losing season since 2002,
Right.
which is incredible. So your fan base is just spoiled beyond belief. I mean, no one does that. I think the next team is like maybe 2012. I mean, it's incredible golf between that and the next team as far as losing season. So it's unrealistic, right? What the Steelers have done is unrealistic almost because it just doesn't happen. You don't go 21, 22 seasons and not have a losing season just once. It just doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah. Not since Ben came into the league.
Yeah.
So that's Tomlin's biggest critique right now. 6 seasons without a playoff win. Now, a much different standard than Chuck Noll, who had 5 straight seasons without a playoff appearance, or even Cowher, who had 6 and 10 seasons. Tomlin seems to be perceived differently. Is this just because this younger generation is spoiled with winning? Are fans prejudiced? Why is Tomlin perceived differently?
Well, I mean, I think he's been perceived differently from the beginning. I mean, if you wanna put it on race, I mean, you can. I mean, when you see him, it's obvious that he's black, so everybody knows that. I think I think a lot of it, at least initially, was I think a lot of the media wanted Russ Graham.
Mm-hmm.
They knew Russ Graham. They saw, okay, hey, Russ comes in, hey, we already got him. He's the guy we can talk to. He'll help us out. They knew him. They didn't know Mike Tomlin. Nobody knew Mike Tomlin, right? Other than Dan Rooney, apparently. And then he comes in and he's not telling you anything, right? He's not giving you anything. He doesn't give anybody anything. He's not giving us anything. He's not giving the Tribune anything. He's not giving the PG anything. So we're all being treated equally bad, right? So we lost that. So the media lost that. They lost that guy that they could have probably even had a beer with in Russ Graham. So I think that factored into it. I mean, I think not just Mike Tomlin. I think, as far as black coaches, I think there's always been a talk about, black coach will get an opportunity and if it doesn't work, that's it. I mean, which makes Mike Tomlin's situation just almost unbelievable that he's been on the job 17 years. They have not all been 17 great years. He's had some 8-8s. He's missed playoffs. And kind of doing the recap and looking through some of the seasons, the thing that struck out to me was that I thought just looking at what they had, they should have probably won a couple more Super Bowls. I look at even the year they lost to Denver when Peyton Manning was the quarterback.
Yeah.
They had that team. You think about it, it was a very close game. They lost one of the backup running back because I guess Le'Veon Bell was hurt.
Yep.
And up to the backup actually played because I think D'Angelo Williams was there too. And they almost won that game at Denver, and Denver went on to win the Super Bowl. So you think about that. That team that wasn't at full strength. And I think Brown had gotten. I don't know if Brown had gotten hurt or not, but they were not at full strength and almost won it. And maybe if they had gone to the Super Bowl, they would have won that one. Le'Veon Bell was injured at least 2 of the playoff games.
Yeah.
So that team with Ben, AB and Bell, they were never just together at full strength to see, so we could really see what they would have done. Maybe they would have done it, maybe not. So I think that he could have easily, he took the team to 2. He could have probably easily at least gone to 4. I just looking at the roster. And I think the amazing thing now, we look at that roster, just is no way near what it was. I mean, I was just looking at some of the players. I hate to call people up, but number 38, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a linebacker that slow or safety. I mean, I watched him several weeks. And even last week, he got the interception. And I said, he needs to go score.
Yeah.
And I said, they're not going to score if he doesn't. He got tackled. But he looked like he was so slow. I was like, dude, you need to get in the end zone. And I think of the players that he had, the James Farriers, the Larry Foots, Lawrence Timmons, Lamar Woodley, the talent that those teams had. This team just does not even, and most of their best players on defense, a lot of those guys are hurt right now. So the talent level is just down. Quarterback situation is a mess. The fact that they're still 7-6 and with a chance, possibly outside chance to go to the playoffs. I think what Steelers fans don't look at is that look at Sandy Chargers. Look at the Chargers right now. They have a franchise quarterback who's hurt right now. They're like 5-7 or whatever. The Steelers could be 2-11.
Yeah.
Then you'd be dealing with NFL reality. So would you rather have 2-11 or would you rather have 7-6? I guess maybe that would be an argument. And I think Steelers fans, they say, oh, we just haven't. No, you haven't. It happens. Bill Belichick's struggling. Great coaches struggle, and Tomlin's struggling, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. I'm assuming he will be back, but I don't know. The NFL. We'll see how these final 4 games go.
See, I think this is one of Tomlin's biggest strengths. Any coach could win with Roethlisberger or Antonio Brown, James Farrier, or Troy Polamalu. But Tomlin has put competitive teams together with Duck Hodges, Dennis Dixon, now Michael Walker.
I don't mean to bash the young man, but it's just so glaring. I mean, watching him play. I mean, yeah, it's funny you mentioned Duck Hodges. That's what I was thinking about. I remember the year that year, I wrote about it in the book. He played Michael Vick a couple games. And Michael actually won a game. I mean, he was pretty much washed up at that point, right? And Michael Vick won a big game against the Chargers, I think.
Oh, yeah. What a great game, yeah.
Yeah, he picked me up. But then go back to Duck Hodges. He would just pick and choose and piecemeal teams together. And he never in fact, this year is the first year I really actually heard him talk about the injuries. Because when I covered the team, it was always next man up.
Yeah.
They didn't talk about the injuries. But this year I've actually heard him talking about injuries, which, was the first time I've really heard that, which kind of telling me something. He said, I'm trying, but I got this guy behind this guy behind this guy. And that's all I got.
Well, the book is great. Tomlin, the soul of a football coach. John Harris, thank you so much for taking the time today and for coming on. Have a happy holidays.
I appreciate you having me, Kyle. I really enjoyed it, man. Keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing some great stuff here. Now that I've located you, I'm going to be checking you out. And, thank you so much for thinking of me and having me on your program.
Congrats with the book. Congrats with promotion. I know it's a busy time right now.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you. And happy holidays to you and the family.
Did you bring the peanuts, pretzels, popcorn? Did you bring the burgers?
Where's the beer?
Did you bring the ketchup, mustard, pickles? Did you bring the pumper?
Yeah, it's here.
Did you bring the icy light Iron City pumper?
Can't forget the pumper.
One of each.
Did you bring the ice to chill the pumper?
Yeah.
When you want a cold one, just reach. Have a picnic, have a party, call the people, tap the pumper, have a pumper party. Did you bring the pumper? Did you bring the pumper? Did you bring the pumper? Yeah.
Well, welcome back. I'm very excited to talk with today's guest. He's an author of more than 24 books, including arguably the greatest book about the Steelers, About 3 Bricks Shy of a Load, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. He also publishes a very entertaining Substack called Take Another Little Piece of My Heart Now. Ray Blount Jr., welcome to What Yinz Talking About.
Good. Thank you, Kyle. It's good to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. You know, you embedded yourself with the Steelers in 1973. This was before anyone knew they would become one of the great sports dynasties. So what attracted you to Pittsburgh and the Steelers in the first place?
Well, I had loved covering the Pirates. The Pirates were of the 70s were wonderfully funny and wild and crazy. And, they had Stargell and Sanguian and Clemente. And they were always yelling at each other and picking each other off the ground and attacking each other. And I thought that was the funniest locker room I'd ever been in. And but then I also did a story for Sports Illustrated about the Rooney family. Oddly enough, I lost that this was back before computers and things. I lost the entire text typed out on the paper of that story and all the notes in a cab. And so I had to recreate that whole story by memory. Otherwise, this book never would have come about, I don't think. At any rate, so I wrote that, and I liked the Rooneys too, and I loved the town of Pittsburgh. I mean, the fact that the Rooneys lived there and walked to the stadium, or Art Sr. would walk to the stadium, and they were just embedded in, and there were lots of characters and everybody was connected to the Steelers somewhere or another. So, and then also I saw the Immaculate Reception
Of course.
on TV, and thought, well, the Steelers were coming. They were on their way, and ideally I would have come the Super Bowl week, I guess, but it was good because I kept coming back Super Bowl year. I mean, I kept coming back year to year. So I went to all 4 of the first Super Bowls and wrote about them and added them to this book.
When I first read it, it kind of reminded me sort of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Would it be fair to put you in the category of that new journalism with, Hunter S. Thompson and Capote, or would you reject that comparison?
No, I think so. I mean, gonzo, they used to call it.
Yeah.
Trump appropriated that word recently without knowing what it meant. But there was a sort of wild and free kind of coverage of people who were wild and free. And, in fact, Hunter Thompson tried to do the same thing I did, only he tried to do it with the Raiders, but they ran him off after a while, the management. So my reputation was a little less gonzo than his, so I was able to slip in there. But I was trying to do a regular job, and it wasn't all about how wild and crazy I was, which sometimes gonzo it was about. And I tried to get as deeply into the individual players' psyches as I could.
Who do you think you became the closest with? Just from reading, it seems like Ray Mansfield was certainly a confidant.
Yeah, Mansfield was probably my closest friend on the team. Andy Russell too, and but LC and Dwight White. I really had a range of confidants on the team. Rocky Bleier offered to tape a team meeting for me, but I thought that sounded a little. I appreciated the offer, but I thought that was a little like I was going where I was not. That's the only thing, the only aspect of the Steelers' lives that I didn't get in on was team meetings, and but then I heard about them afterwards. So,
I think one of the fascinating things is, the off season before you joined them, Ernie Holmes was arrested. There was a police chase and a shootout, but he returned to the team for camp. Today, that would be a huge media circus. What was the attitude toward that situation when you arrived?
Well, everybody was saying, don't provoke Ernie, don't provoke fast. And so I gradually got to know him. But then, what was the whole story was that I talked to him about it and about his episode. Well, he had actually been shooting at police helicopters overhead. I mean, it was a real, but the Rooney's took him back and talked to him and helped him get straightened out financially and one thing and another. And so he was back with the team, and he was a big part of that of the steel curtain. And but I just was careful and got to know him, and he saw that other people on the team trusted me. So I don't know why they trusted me so much, as a matter of fact. But I tried not to get anybody arrested or divorced or fired. And there's a lot of material that you can get into without getting into any of those.
Definitely. One of the things that fascinated me, you wrote that the locker room was like divided into three contingents. There was like the country boys, the black players, and the geeks. And I was curious who might be considered a geek. I was thinking maybe Jack Ham. I don't know who might have been a geek on that roster.
Probably Craig Hanneman, who's also a country boy, but I mean, he tipped snuff. But he was also, I've forgotten the geeks. I don't know. I've forgotten that part. I'll have to go back and read my book.
Oh no, sure. I don't want to nitpick certain details, but that just was pretty fascinating. Race was kind of an ongoing theme in the book. You wrote that the social scene among the players was still kind of segregated in '73. Were there players that could cross those color barriers? Did you have a problem, with that kind of situation?
It was fluid, and they had these parties that everybody came to. I've forgotten the name of the man now who would host the party after every game, and there was lots of black family and white family interaction. People telling what would now be considered inappropriate jokes back and forth across the color line. It was, I think, a healthy mix. And the one thing was that the black players were pretty much from the South, from Texas or Mississippi, in the case of LC, for instance. And so there was some considerable cultural overlap there. But they weren't famous yet, and they hadn't really hardened to any, and they all came from, Andy Russell was the only really middle class, the only one with a middle class background. So I think they all had lots in common growing up. And I found it was still sort of being sorted out racially, but I think while I was covering them, it got sorted out. In fact, a couple of, Joe Green took me aside afterwards after the book came out and said, you brought up a lot of shit that we dug.
You depict a pretty harsh reality when it comes to injuries that maybe most fans weren't aware of at that time. But were concussions or brain trauma on anyone's radar yet at that time?
No, it's really kind of embarrassing how little. Ernie Holmes had gone off on a tangent, but there was nothing. No, the first person who's the
Mike Webster.
Webster, yeah, Mike Webster was the first person to show that, and he showed it in. I almost said he showed it to a sudden and considerable extent, but but that was after I spent the '73 season with them, and then kept coming back '74, and Webster didn't even join the team till '74. So by the time he didn't start showing symptoms till after I was covering the team. And steroids also. Jim Clack was said to have taken steroids until his wife made him quit. and he was not huge. Steve Corson later on was huge. Corson also was after my group, really. And so I was able to get at them before they were. But now lots of them have, hardly any of the players alive today after, and they were all mostly younger than me.
Yeah, no, there's a great story about Jim Clack putting on weight. I'll let people pick up the book to get all that. Now, you observed the fans. They would boo Terry at times. This is obviously before he was the legend, but how did you perceive the relationship between the fans? How did they perceive the team and the players? It seems like, I don't know. It just seems like they didn't. I don't know. I don't want to say ignorant of the players as humans, but it certainly seems like they treated them, as commodities or as people on TV or something.
Yeah. Well, I think fans in general tend to, not just football fans, not just sports fans, but fans tend to think they own these public figures that they're attached to. They think they're part of these people's lives, and they will, talk about them as if they know. Fans will talk about players as if if the players would only listen to them, there would be the fans know more about the players than the players themselves, until all of a sudden there's a player standing in front of them, and then their mouths fall open, and they suddenly seem a lot less authoritative.
Yeah, totally. You got to spend time with Terry Bradshaw, and it seems like in '73, it wasn't certain whether was it going to be Terry, was it going to be Joe Gilliam? He wasn't the legend that we know today. Did his
Henry,
yeah. Did his success surprise you? Could you see the greatness in him at the time?
Well, I mean, people would say things like he's a great specimen, but I don't know whether he's going to learn how to play the position. He was, all three quarterbacks started at one time or another because of injuries or one thing. And Hanratty was like, now it can be told that it was Ray Mansfield who said to me, you want your quarterback to be like Bugs Bunny, outsmarting everybody. And Terry's just too much like Elmer Fudd. Then I talked to Bradshaw's agent after that, and he said, after your book came out, Terry called me up and said, "Who is Elmer Fudd?" But Bradshaw was, was a great. I mean, my book doesn't do justice to him because he came into his own after the full year I spent with him.
Another icon that you got to spend time with was Bill Nunn. It seemed like he was a lot of fun to be around. What do you remember about him?
Yeah, he was. He took me on a scouting trip down to the Black University. Black colleges, historically African American colleges, or whatever the term is. Mm-hmm. In the South, and we went from all those Alcorn and all those, and Nunn had in fact been a pioneer of scouting those teams and getting prospects from those teams. He got in ahead of the rest of the NFL. He had been a newspaper guy and knew the Pittsburgh Courier. He was worked for them, and he knew the whole black college scene down there, and knew everybody. And we would go down, and I saw some of the greatest halftime shows I've ever seen, and I saw, and that was a lot of fun. At one point I was in. I fell over back. We were eating. Oh God, what's that stuff? The stuff that you cut out of the lining of stomachs of pigs.
Oh, like chitlins.
Chitlins.
Yeah.
I can't believe that I've drifted so far from my roots that I can't remember the word chitlins. We were eating chitlins and drinking bourbon in this in an after after hours club, and I tipped over backwards in my chair and fell flat on my back. And I just got back up and recommenced. But I was able to hang with those guys and they weren't quickly embarrassed by me. So it worked out all right.
Today, people younger than me never got to, even see Art Rooney, the Chief. He's kind of like a mythic figure for generations now. And then reading your book, it's you kind of add to the myth. You say that there's really you couldn't find any negative thing to say about him. Was he really that great of a guy?
Well, he was a great. Yeah, I think he was had managed to acquire a saintliness to the point where he worked hard at it. Actually, he went to everybody's wake, and he was. And he had this great sort of, he seemed perfectly open, and available, and yet he had this reserve that, so he played his character well. And then he knew, he had actually played baseball, amateur baseball, with Hannes Wagner.
Wow.
After Wagner played in the big leagues, he came back to Pittsburgh and would play in some kind of amateur league. That's how I learned to pronounce it Hannes rather than Honus. So he had been around a long time, and I guess there's been more reporting since my book about how deeply involved Art Rooney was in the rough element growing up in Pittsburgh.
His grandson Art II is now the team president. He would have only been like 20 at the time that when you were with the team. Do you remember any presence he had? Yeah,
he was around. I knew him. He was a young guy, and I went. I came 2 or 3 years ago. I went back and wrote a story for Sports Illustrated about going back, and I hadn't really kept up with Art the Third, and so it was different. I didn't really establish a bond with him, but he was a good kid, obviously, and had a future with the team, as we have seen.
It's like looking back on 50 years. What is there anything that sticks out at you? What do you remember most fondly, I guess, about that season?
Oddly enough, falling over on my back in that after-hours club and getting back up and eating more chitlins was a pretty good moment. I don't know. There were things like that where it just could have been embarrassing, but they were a very accepting organization, and they nobody put on any airs. There was a big point of that team and that family was to not put on airs. And so I enjoyed that aspect of it. And there was a great moment when I'm trying to remember this exactly, but after Ernie Holmes, I guess it was after the book came out, and I was back, and Holmes said, "What'd you write that shit about me in your book for?" And I said, "Oh God, what?" And he had said to me. He had told me about his shooting thing where he'd run off the road and was shooting with a pistol up at the police helicopters. And he told me about it, and I quoted him. And one thing he said was, and I was acting with with the mind of a child and the brains of a warrior. I quoted him as saying that, and he did say it. So, but then I ran into him on the plane, team plane later, and he said, and he gave me a hard look, and people were saying, "Don't mess with him," and somebody said he's running on a 30-watt bulb. But we'd already got along. He had shaved his head, so it was an arrowhead pointing ahead. But at any rate, I tried to talk to him, and I said, he said, "Hey, hello, enemy." And I said, no, we're not. Somehow we talked it down, and we got to be friends again. And so it was things like that. And other people, Craig Hanneman didn't like what I wrote about him. And I was sorry about that because he had been very free with, and I didn't character. Well, I don't know. I just quoted what he had said to me, and he's
Sure.
the only one I think who really I was disappointed at his being hurt by the book.
Well, there's so many fascinating details that you need to get the book to really discover, from Hitler's chauffeur to arm wrestling wives, John Kolb's life-saving heroics. So I encourage everyone to get the book. You can still purchase 3 Bricks Shy of a Load on Audible, and you can subscribe to your Substack at royblountjr.substack.com. Is there anything else that I should plug before we wrap things up?
No, I wish I should run out and write something right quick so you could plug it. But,
Well, we're going to give away a copy to our listeners, and I really appreciate your time with us, Mr. Blount. Thanks so much for hanging out today.
okay, Kyle, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm wearing my Mel Blount jersey, by the way.
Oh, that's great. That's a good one. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Congrats and good luck with everything else.
Hey, I appreciate you hanging around for those interviews. If you're looking for a Steelers Christmas gift, even though it's a year old now, the Tomlin biography by John Harris, and even though it's now 50 years old, about 3 bricks shy of a load from Roy Blount Jr. Can't go wrong with either of those for the Steelers fan in your life. I'll be back next week. Greg and we will have your usual hot and toxic takes as Hell Unleashing season continues. Until then, keep listening to your coach.
Be their best selves. That's going to be required.
Stay in school.